Hello, I'm Lindsay Hansen Park, the Executive Director of the Sunstone Education Foundation, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's Sunstone Summer Symposium. Tonight, as we kick off our opening lecture, generously hosted by the Smith-Pettit Foundation, I just want to remind everyone to log into our app. You can watch this through Whova. If you're not logged into our app, you can register at sunstone.org and join us through the app. Otherwise, you can watch this on Facebook. It is being recorded and will be hosted on our site as well as the Whova app through December. The Smith-Pettit lecture is our opening lecture every year, and it's designed by the Smith-Pettit Foundation to bring a non-Mormon speaker to our community to speak about issues of faith. And this year's Smith-Pettit speaker will be the incredible Krista Tippett, who will be interviewed by a beloved friend of Sunstone, Dan Wotherspoon. We want to remind folks that registration is still open, and you can come in person at the Mountain America Center in Sandy, Utah, or if you'd like to attend remotely, you can buy an all virtual ticket at sunstone.org, which gives you access to all of the sessions. Like I said, that will be up through December. We are also offering morning seating in person at the venue for the live stream sessions, and then our sessions will be in person starting around noon into the evening. So you can support Sunstone by registering today. Just want to say a few words to our audience this year, because last year we did an all virtual conference. This year we're back in person together. It's sort of nerve-wracking in all sorts of new and unusual ways. But one of the things I've come to value about my Mormon heritage is how we're stitched together. We're like this rugged quilt, frayed at the edges, torn at every seam, and yet we still make up this tapestry of community that I think a lot of people outside of our community can't fully grasp. We're enmeshed in ways that few people can understand unless they grew up in a tight-knit, cohesive group. I think we get this from our heritage and our past because early Mormonism was a village. Early Mormon settlers relied on community, and cohesion was literally linked to their survival. Early Mormons depended on one another because they had to. They didn't eat if they didn't work, and their neighbors didn't either. So they worked together, they ate together, they danced together, they played together, they fought together, they made mistakes together. Mormonism is a village, even though some of us move our stakes beyond the boundaries of our faith out into the big world. But we are always tethered in some way to our village. That is what Sunstone is for so many of us. It's a tether that brings us back once a year to our village, to the good, the bad, the ugly. The voices that gather here speak to the best and the worst of our community. In it is the shadow and the light. Here we honor the voices of the past, present, and future. All who, as Juanita Brooks used to phrase it, value our intellectual independence. For some of us, it's our North Star, as my tradition's president Hinckley would have said. For others, it's a battle. And to many, it's a gift that comes freely. These are just some of the reasons why I love this community with my whole heart. Through it, I've met the most remarkable people. I'm so grateful to be with all of you again, especially during such a strange time. Many of you are meeting with us for the first time in a long time, cracking open the window and stepping out into this new space. I don't know if it's this way for you, but for me, it's both alien and familiar. It's really, really strange to have lived through a pandemic like this. It's been an unprecedented year. We've all been through a very hard thing individually and in community with one another. And some people have had the best time of their lives, reshaping priorities, finding new hope and opportunities, but others have struggled and suffered. And not even all of our friends, not even all of our Sunstone friends have made it through with us. And my heart will always hold space for them. Regardless, we've all come through this time together. In a recent phone call with a friend of mine, Jeff, he mentioned that one thing that we all share from this experience is the loss of certainty. The loss of certainty, you pointed out, brings out this impulse to cling to whatever concrete thing we can find. All of us are grappling, scraping to hold on to one truth that we can know for certain. And for myself, the house of sand that I built this idea on was, it's all going to be fine and it's all going to sort itself out and eventually we'll return to normal. But I don't think things work like that. We move forward, and normal is sort of an illusion. And I'm not sure I'd return to the past anyway. This past year and a half has changed me. And so many of us have changed. We're grappling with new grief, new loss. And it feels like everybody's coping right now, sort of reverting to their coping strategies. If you're anxious like me, you might cope by avoiding socializing, or some people are avoiding emails or phone calls. It's been a challenge. People are battling their depressions, their stress, their survival. And some are also surviving success, which brings on a new and different kind of stress. And unfortunately for some in our community, they've coped with drugs and alcohol, and some have coped with violence. And whatever our coping strategies are, most of us are just trying to get through it. At Sunstone, we cannot offer certainty. I wish that we could. I think it's what we're all yearning for right now. I believe the only certain thing that we have is that we can bring our love, our compassion, and our empathy to show up for community with as much generosity and grace as we can afford. As we open the conference this year, we are begging for your patience and your help. Like our forebears, we need to be a village to engage each other in the right way in the coming months, in a way where we recognize that everyone is speaking out of a genuine belief formed from their own experiences. What I think we all need, myself included, is more curiosity and more inquisitive empathy. Some of you might seem starved for it, but I am certain of one thing: it's true compassion. It's true love, true compassion that begets more compassion. If we practice this for those around us, then we are practicing it for ourselves. And in this way, we work together and collectively. My hope is that you may feel welcome here. You may feel welcome here with all your individual sorrow and joy in this village of fellow seekers and friends. And with that, I present my dear friend Dan Wotherspoon, who will open this session. Brother Wotherspoon is a former editor and executive director of Sunstone. He has been an active participant in the work and development of the Society for Mormon Philosophy and Theology. He was a longtime host of the Mormon Matters and currently hosts Latter-day Faith, a weekly podcast exploring the theology of Mormonism. Dan has a PhD in religion from Claremont Graduate School, where he wrote his dissertation on theological resources within Mormonism for affirming a robust environmental sensibility. He also has a master's in religious studies from Arizona State University, where he focused on world religions and ritual studies, ultimately writing his thesis on theories of ritual empowerment. He also has a bachelor's in philosophy with a minor in classical civilization from Brigham Young University. Dan has been a friend and a mentor for so long, and it is my pleasure to turn the time now over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. How fun it is to see you, Krista, and welcome everybody. This is the opportunity that has made me extremely nervous, but also excited for so long. I have been a longtime fan of Krista's. I think I picked her up in the very first year and have been spending money like crazy on all the authors that she brings on the show and whatnot. And it's just been, she's been such an important part of my own journey, as well as the voices of her guests. And I just love how she brings things together. Krista, I'm going to introduce you a little bit for those who maybe haven't realized exactly how celebrated you are, but Krista has her show On Being, which was formerly called Speaking of Faith, has won the Peabody Award, which everyone knows is a big deal. She's also so she hosts it. It's on more than 400. Her show is on more than 400 public radio stations. Her podcast has been listened to more than I think it was 30 million downloads. There's been a little 30 million downloads and things. And she's an author. And I'll tell you, these 3 books that I'm going to mention are absolutely amazing to me. And I actually fairly often quote from a couple of them. Speaking of faith, Why Religion Matters and How to Talk About It. That was her first book. Then she followed that with Einstein's God, Conversations About Science and the Human Spirit. And then her third one is Becoming Wise, an inquiry into the mystery and art of living. And I think that that's going to be playing out in our discussion tonight, as well as her new project, which I'll let her describe when we get to that point. One more honor, just to mention out of many, is in 2014, she was honored with the, I wrote it down here. Where's the President Obama one? Oh yeah, here it is. The National Humanities Medal for thoughtfully delving into the mysteries of human existence. Welcome, Krista.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm glad to be with you.
I'm not used to like having my face when I podcast and when I interview people, and it's a little bit. Anyway, it's just great to have you. You and I exchanged some questions ahead of time, and sort of at least we kind of agreed on a flow to our conversation. At least we'll see where it goes. We hope it'll get most of those things in. And I think anybody who's ever listened to your show knows what the first question is, the first invitation anyway. And that is to please let everyone know a little bit about your upbringing, your faith upbringing, especially the spirituality that was in your home and all that good stuff. So thanks.
Yeah, well, I'll just say a little bit about why I asked that question. First of all, even in our world where so many people are not growing up with religious formation and in very new phenomenon, I find if I ask about the religious or spiritual background of somebody's childhood, almost everyone has a story to tell. Even if it's a story of absence, there's a story.
Yeah.
And I also find that question connects people's minds up with their bodies, right? And that place in us when we think about spiritual background is full of questions. And we often think of religion, it gets the kind of public face of religion, which is obviously kind of nonsensical because as though it's one thing, but the public face of religion is all about answers. And especially when my fellow journalists draw out religious people, it's all about the answers they have. That place in us is full of questions. And I find when people start talking about that, they often start describing questions that they have followed all their lives in whatever they've done. So it's a magical place to start. And the other interesting thing about the question is it depends. You don't tell it the same way every time.
Right.
I've thought about this question across many years now, and I don't know what I'm going to say to you now, but it won't be exactly what I've said before. I mean, for me, it always revolves somehow around my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was, he was the religious patriarch of our family. He was a preacher. He was a pastor. He was a hellfire and brimstone preacher. I suppose now one would categorize, I mean, we were Southern Baptist, and I think now people would say that I grew up in the evangelical world. I think it had evangelical influences, it had Pentecostal influences. And my grandfather was such a passionate person, he was just very vigorous and embodied, and he was passionate about his faith, and he laughed a lot. And I remember him playing with me more than all the other adults put together. And his faith was very stern. And, my grandfather had a second grade education, and he had a very beautiful mind. He hadn't been invited. He loved his Bible. he had not been invited to bring the life of his mind to the Bible. I think he was frightened of the questions he might ask. And I think even even at a young age, and as I grew older, I couldn't understand, if God is God, how we could be scared of our questions.
Right.
And I felt like there was a lot of fear in him because of the life he'd led. He, came to Oklahoma in a covered wagon, had lived in really, really abject poverty. There was a lot of addiction in his family at a time when that was an incurable, fatal malady. And so he had a lot of fear in his body. And there's a way in which I have felt like I asked the questions I ask fearlessly with him beside me. I asked questions, I think he would have loved speaking to scientists as I do and learning about all of this. And I like to think that I asked those questions he wouldn't have asked.
Yeah. And, we're such Mormonism is a multi-generational church. The infants to the 90-year-olds are all together in our main meeting, and then we break apart. And so I meet with a group of 18 to 90-year-olds in the men's group when those weeks come around. And it's the way you talk about him and his intelligence. There's a sense there. Well, let's put it this way. I get a sense that his worldview, you came to understand it and realize why he held that way. And I think that's an important thing for all of us. You've entered into him, you've entered into his life. And tell me what it looked like for him that you came to see.
Yeah, that's right. So I left for college and I really changed worlds, right? I went from Oklahoma to New England, and then I went on to Europe. And I did have this experience of kind of, religion was not church was not something you did, a place you went once a week. All of our life revolved around church. And
sounds familiar to many here.
Yeah, I mean, it was the whole context of life. Now, when I left, I never had a big rebellion against it. I just wasn't sure how relevant it was to the world I had entered. And I think I did what young people do, right? I also found what there was to criticize and judge in my grandfather and his beliefs and how rigid they were. And I think, his fearfulness, which was behind a lot of that sternness. And I think, there are many ways to answer that question, but I have thought deeply about the world he grew up in and how reasonable all that fear was in his body. There were a lot of rules. In fact, it was all about rules. It was about love. And then it was about a lot of rules. And I came to understand that, it wasn't just no drinking. It was no playing card games. It was staying away from every slippery slope. It wasn't not just about not having sex before marriage. It was never wearing shorts or dancing, because these things could be tempting. But then, as I say, I realized that there was a real intelligence also in that world in which pre-12 steps, pre-AA, that's the first time we had any kind of this. It's a social technology or spiritual technology for people suffering and for families suffering from those things. And childbirth out of wedlock in the time in which he grew up was catastrophic. It truly was catastrophic. So I start to see that this fearfulness and these rules had sense to them, and that life is complicated, and he knew life was complicated, and it was very easy for me to judge. And I also started to, I think, not experience his sternness to negate his passion and his loving
Mhm.
and the sense he gave me of a loving universe. But to
Yes.
understand that all those things can be held together. And in fact, they are held together in human lives.
Yes, and that's the secret to making it through the world in a healthy way, is to be able to hold all that. Yeah, I really love that you've reflected on that. You hinted here about your travels following Oklahoma and the immersion there. Tell us about that. You went to college, you were studying journalism, you went to Europe as a journalist, and some things happened along the way.
Yeah, a few things happened. Yeah, so I very strangely I was interested in politics. No, I was asking the question of what really matters in life and what moves things. And it was a different era, and kind of that political sphere, that sphere of journalism and policy, felt to me like the sphere of not just power, but influence, how to shape lives and societies. And I got really fascinated by that Cold War dynamic of that world in which I was a young adult. And through just a series of things that I didn't really plan, I ended up learning German, and I ended up in divided Berlin.
Yes.
In my 20s. And I went there as a journalist, and then I had a kind of I became a special assistant to our ambassador to West Germany. I was working with nuclear arms experts. And, in some ways, I feel like the battle between good and evil that was part of my religious worldview growing up was very easy to translate into that Cold War
For sure.
trauma. And it was familiar to me, and it really did have religious dimensions. I think when we look back on it, we see that. And it became a place where, divided Berlin was really a great big social experiment. You take one people, one nation, one language, one culture, one history, you split it down the middle, and you put them in two, not just different geopolitical, economic, social systems, but systems that actually had missiles pointed at each other, right?
Yeah.
So very intense, but also, and I didn't see it this way then. It's what I've made sense of since. For somebody who was young and asking, what has meaning in life, and how do I have a meaningful life, to have this experience of people living in utterly opposed circumstances and seeing that, I just got fascinated by how people chose or failed to create lives of dignity and beauty and intimacy. And I saw people on the eastern side of the wall who really had nothing and who did that. And I saw people just, on the other side of the wall in a world away, who had everything and had very shallow, empty lives. And at some point, I also saw that the people moving the missiles around on the map of Europe, while they were doing something important, weren't actually addressing that matter of how we create meaning and dignity out of these lives we have. And I went to study theology because
Right. So that's quite the move. You were at the State Department.
And when I started looking at that, I didn't do that because I felt a call to ordination, but I realized that this is the sphere of the human enterprise where we have asked these questions of what matters in a life and what matters in a death, and how to love and who we are to each other. It's about our relationship to ultimate things, but it's also about the strangeness and complexity of being a human, and it's about our belonging to each other.
Absolutely. So the move to Yale Divinity, where I'm headed with this is, as I look at you, I see someone who I believe has caught the energy, has the passion that you would associate with the word vocation versus career versus job versus how I pay the bills. it's a real love. It's like what Buchner said, where your greatest joys meet the world's greatest needs. And I see that that's where you're at in your life. And I'd love you to reflect just a little bit about vocation, and especially as you get going in this, those whose work maybe isn't as fulfilling and joyful.
Yeah.
And there is still ways to lift up your vocation in a different way.
Yeah, well, this is something I've thought a lot about. I think that's that notion of vocation and calling is really, really important to me. And something that concerns me, that I think I'm really interested in kind of the multitudinous vocations that we all have. And I do think that in the 20th century, maybe before, in the world I grew up in any case, in this country, we kind of collapsed and equated vocation with your job title,
Right.
with what you were being paid to do. And you're right. I'm very fortunate that I walked into work that, is very mission drenched. But I think that in any given life, I think our vocation as human beings is not just about the work we do. It's about how we are as family, as parents, as children, as friends, as neighbors, as colleagues, as citizens. And I also know that even while it's true that my work, as you say, it's just so closely aligned with my largest sense of mission and values. That does not mean that I have always modeled all of those things perfectly in my life. I have still had this struggle to be human. And I'm also aware that at any given time in the last 20 years, that my vocation as a mother was actually my primary vocation. Right?
Beautiful.
I think in any life, that what that primary vocation is shifts, and it's held in relationship with other vocations. And my mother is very ill right now, and there's a vocation that I suddenly have of care for her. That's different. That's new. That is a new calling, and that is a new part of my identity. And to your point, I worry actually about the language that gets thrown around in our culture a lot about finding meaningful work.
Yeah.
As though if you don't have work that by definition is meaningful, I think the implication is you don't have a vocation.
Right.
And I think that there are a variety of callings, and that many people, that meaningful vocation may be in their relationships, maybe in caregiving, maybe in the kind of neighbor they are, maybe in avocations, right? You are a musician or what, and even that's kind of poetic, but I don't want to put the notion of vocation in a box. And just the last thing I'll say, and I sometimes say this to people because I do meet people who say, oh, I'm so jealous, like you have the perfect job, you have the perfect life. And the truth is, and this is true of clergy as well. When you have a job that is by definition meaningful, there are particular challenges that come with that, of separating yourself from that role. I have had times where I really wished I could come home at night and completely turn off work. And, so yeah, it's complex.
Yeah.
But I really love the language of vocation and calling. And I think it can help us be more reverent of all the ways we give our life energy and create that dignity and beauty and intimacy for ourselves. That's where vocation is.
Beautiful. Now, in mentioning, I want to come home and turn it all off, would you mind sharing how you do recharge your batteries? What is I don't know if it's a personal practice or just how you schedule your world so that you can
Yeah.
realign.
Well, I would say that I've had varying degrees of success across the years. When I look back at, my kids are now in their 20s, but when I look back at those, those active years of parenting at home, I mean, parenting is still very present, but it's different when it's just this physical, all the physicality of it. I don't think I was very balanced, and I don't think we can always, I'm not sure that's always a possible thing. And I had years, also kind of building this project, all people, when people romanticize my job, they think I just sit around having beautiful conversations. And the truth is that's just this fraction of what I do. And I, started an organization really just to keep the work safe and all the things that come with that. Raising money, leading an organization, all the social drama of a workplace.
Right.
So there have been, there were about 10 years there where I kept getting very, very exhausted and wearing myself thin. You are meeting me in a moment when I appreciated Lindsay's words about this time we've just lived through. And I mean, to me, the pandemic and year of social isolation was very much a roller coaster. And I had some dark months in there. I am right now, but I also think I got rested, right? I was supposed to be on the road many months.
Yeah.
I was grounded, and I am realizing that my body got restored. And I am, one of the things I'm going to want to be faithful to is the realization that I don't want to live that way. So I actually am emerging from this with an energy and a sense of restedness that I have not felt for a long time.
I'm so glad. May it be for everyone. If you don't mind me taking you into a period of your life, you mentioned that you had 10 years of being really exhausted. I know that in your 30s, you've talked a bit about experiencing genuine depression.
Yes.
And I know that will help, draw you closer to so many people here listening to this. Would you share a little bit about that and any reflections on the gift? If there's anything there, I don't want to downplay the lack of affect, all the various other things, but I think there is something for that in that area.
Yes, in my mid-30s, if I look back now, I actually think I can see times that I think I had dips into depression. But when I was younger, there was no language for it, and you kind of lived through it and beyond it. But in my 30s, I had a really serious clinical depression, and for me, it had to do with. It wasn't situational. I think I got depressed when after many years of moving around and doing, I finally got into a place where it was safe for me to fall apart, and I fell apart. And not that I knew that, but that's what happened. And depression, I think once you've been in that dark place, knowing it is there, knowing it is a possible destination, does mark you, right? And it's been now 25 years since the most severe time. And I would say that, I lived for a long time after that, kind of just always a bit in fear of heading back that direction. And that has lessened a little bit, but we actually did a show. One of the early shows that I wanted to create was we called it The Soul in Depression.
Parker Palmer and others.
With Parker Palmer, yes, and Andrew Solomon and Anita Barrows. that was very early in the show, and it was not that many years after my depression. And I think, I wanted to investigate it. I kind of wanted to know if I could walk back onto that territory, look at it with other people. And it was really frightening. But and also, to your point about the gift of it, I don't think I would have been able to do everything I've done or anything I've done if I hadn't walked through that depression, because I needed to learn things about myself. I needed to learn how I survived and how my survival mechanisms made me so hard and harsh on myself. And yet it's, you never, I think if you are in that place or very close to that place, it's you can't talk about it being a gift, right? And it's something that can be a gift, and yet you would never wish it on anyone. And to me, it was an incredible exercise to be far enough away from it to be able to examine it for what it had given me, and how this experience being part of me, which also means that as a destination I always know is there, has enriched me, has made me who I could become.
Yeah, and you're one of the most compassionate listeners, as well as thoughtful people that I've ever met. Well, I've ever listened to. Now I've met. I appreciate that so much. I think we're moving a little bit fast here, so I want to get into some other things if we can. We are we're a church. Most people, when they think of Mormonism as a tradition, the first thing that comes is belief. They this and they do this and all that good stuff. But a shift happens as you grow spiritually, as you grow there, and beliefs don't become as important as a trust in what you've experienced, faith, whatever language you want to give to that. I love a term that you build it right into the website. I was looking at it and seeing how many times it's there, and it's part of the arc of kind of trying to zero in on what is a meaningful life. And I think the term I want you to reflect on, if you don't mind, is animating questions. To be centered in questions that animate. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I would love a little bit more.
Yeah. So when I started this show, and it was a really hard thing to talk about on public radio, to get going on public.
Yes.
Radio. And I feel like if we did it all over again, I would still call it Speaking of Faith. But that was controversial because, the word faith is so meaningful for so many people and so fraught for others. But I think and we did change the name 7 years in. But I think the more important part of it is that I realize it's fraught because, it's fraught because people have had experiences, but it's also fraught in public life because we associate faith with talking heads who have all the answers for everyone and God. Right?
Which is the opposite of faith. Yes.
Yeah, right. And what I realized after I'd been doing this for about 5 years is, yes, I am interested in deeply held beliefs and convictions and insights and wisdom. But I felt like that public simplification and almost caricature of religion and religious people actually doesn't transmit the spiritual content or the intellectual content that is so rich. And that what I was really interested in what I was pursuing fundamentally were the animating questions that our traditions arose to address, and that are the enduring human questions what it means to be human, and how we will live and who we will be to each other. And it's those questions as much as who God is. And then that also freed me up to be looking for how in the 21st century those questions are being pursued on new frontiers, and how neuroscience and physics and evolutionary biology are actually in a conversation. At least their findings are in a conversation with theology and with the psychological acuity of our traditions. So yeah, I think those animating questions are what animate me. And yeah, and I also think that there's it's a thing about Western culture in general, but also religion in this culture is this kind of chin up focus on belief, which is very disembodied.
Yes.
And if I think about Mormon tradition, one thing I do actually appreciate about Mormon tradition is that there is an intellectual tradition that is cultivated and honored. And I feel like Mormonism is lived, it is embodied, it is about daily piety, it is about family, it is about ritual, it is about action. So it's connecting all of those things. And
Yeah.
that's where religion is interesting.
That's right. Oh, I love it. And I after I left Sunstone, I went to work for the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy. And our whole idea was bring yourself, bring your entire, in other words, when you're meeting with somebody who you are from a different faith, or perhaps you're even crosswise with, you ask those questions. Well, you speak with each other in ways that they get to know why it animates you so much. And so in that way, you learn to appreciate the person. And even though they're not whitewashing their beliefs, they're not downplaying them, they're bringing the full thing to it, you catch on, not that you're similar in any beliefs, because you don't really want to water down that.
No.
That you're a trusted person, you're somebody who is authentic. And how can I not love you in that authenticity? So it's just, I just appreciate what you did. I would love to know what you actually know about Mormonism. Just while we're here, I know you had Joanna Brooks.
You answered that question to me in advance, and the truth is that a few years back, there was a period where I really dived into it, and yes, I interviewed Joanna Brooks, I interviewed Robert Millett. Richard Mao who used to be president of Fuller Seminary, is somebody he's just been a teacher and a friend to me for a long time, and really even before the origins of the show. And he has been so moved by the evangelical Mormon dialogues that he's been in for years. And I even recently spoke with him again, and he always raises that's so important to him. So both through the conversations I was having and through other experiences like that, I became quite fascinated and respectful of what I learned. I haven't, the show has had, the last few years, it was kind of, I haven't been doing conversations about religion per se. There were other things we needed to talk about, or that I felt called to be looking at. Right. But that is kind of it's in the foundation. Those conversations are, and they're in my foundation.
Well, I think everyone here is listening is appreciating that internal stuffing in, trying to see from the inside out to whatever degree you can, and I'm so grateful for that, knowing that about you. We need to move on to where we can get to some questions from the audience, or those they've been emailing them in, or all the different apps and things that Stephen Carter is collating. But I I think just the way you're embodied and you're talking, and I'm talking with my hands all the time myself, we've got a sense of you're excited and you're seeing things from all these different angles, and now you're trying to put it together in a book, and it's about moral imagination and the 21st century and all that. So let us have we'd love a peek. We'd love a peek.
Okay, I have alas, I have to tell you that this year I decided that I couldn't finish that book right now because,
Okay.
I mean, I have been working on it and I will write it, but I was supposed to hand this book in this summer. And if I hand a book in this summer, it will actually be published in late 2022 or early 2023. And I think anybody right now who thinks they could speak to 2022 or 2023 is really,
Absolutely.
it felt presumptuous to me. So I'm holding on to those thoughts and letting them evolve in this world as it is evolving. And as we are being given, as I am being given, so much to learn and to live into. However, instead of the book, we just created an app, which is the On Being Wisdom app. And it's course-based. And so it's kind of a new adventure. And I've created a 20-session course on hope as a muscle, and drawing on the wisdom, but also the tools for living of this array of people I'm very privileged to be in conversation with. So that became my creative outlet. It's in the App Store.
Cool. I love that, and I appreciate you so much giving us that peek. And as someone who's trying to finish a book as well, and lots of people, it's never coming because you've been talking about it for so darn long. I appreciate that somebody as well established and who knows how to finish books it has had to rethink at times. Yeah,
it felt like a failure because I was raised in this culture, but I decided that I'm gonna live with it.
Yeah. What do you tell your children about what makes a meaningful life, and where is it that what are characteristics of someone when you notice people and say that's a life of, I guess it ties a little bit into vocation, what we were talking about living your vocations in all these different ways, but how would you describe meaningfulness?
Well, that it's true also that so the people who come readily to mind for me are not necessarily people who have big jobs, but who have, deep, vibrant lives. My definition I did write that book, Becoming Wise, and I realized afterward that I never defined wisdom. So after people kept saying, how do you define wisdom? Well, I had to do that. So my definition of a wise life, I think the measure of a wise life, it's not like intelligence or knowledge or accomplishment, which like a wise life might have intelligence and accomplishment, but those are things you can point at and measure. But I think the measure of a wise life is the imprint that life makes on other lives around it. And I feel like if any of us think about the wisest people we've known, that's what we see, that radiating out. And so, when I think of the people I've known up close, not just, people I've interviewed, I see that, and they're not necessarily, again, people who had big professional lives, but they had large lives that mattered, that touched others. I think the reason we did this first course in the app on hope is I think that a muscle of hope is a quality of every admirable life I can think of. It's not a wishful thinking hope. It's not an idealistic hope. It's a pragmatic hope. It's essentially, it is a fierce insistence that that things can change, and it has real world consequences. There's actually a capacity for joy and delight in wise lives, and that's not about being happy in every moment or about everything.
Yes,
but joy is fuel, right? We we take that, I was gonna say we take joy seriously. We cultivate delight. We know how to take delight, and we give that to ourselves and we give it to others, because it also sustains us for what is difficult and long. Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just listening to the Jason Reynolds
Yeah.
episode, and that
So young.
that sense of what you're talking about here
Yes.
is just there. And
Yeah.
I loved his stuff. He works, for everyone who doesn't know, he works with young people. He's an ambassador from the Library of Congress to,
National Ambassador for Young People's Literature.
yeah,
He's an
and it's
extraordinary human being.
terrific episode. And there is that real sense of the wholeness of life, and what our job is as parents is not like your grandfather, just to, make
Yeah.
sure you don't step out of line to where you might get hurt, but to, and talk about the boundaries, talk about the, I'm going to yank your coattail, I think he says, when
Yeah.
you're about to fall off a cliff or touch the hot stove or whatever. But the idea of just letting their imaginations go, letting them play, letting them just be excited and children is really good. And it was just the concept of joy that you were talking about there that just
Yeah.
really hit me.
People who know how to laugh and smile easily. Yeah. And also Jason Reynolds says what so many, I interviewed Robert Coles, the great child psychologist, years ago too, in the beginning when my children were young. But, children understand that life is difficult and complicated. We sometimes overshield them. Like, they get that. And so that's also, there's no sugarcoating. Yes, there are boundaries, but there's also honoring their perceptiveness, and knowing that part of how they become human beings who can walk gracefully through this world is by letting them, being honest about the experience, being alive.
Yeah. And not giving answers, but
Yeah.
helping them work through it, acknowledge it, don't shy from it, and that you're doing more harm when you do.
Yeah.
I think the 45-ish that we were going to talk is about up. I haven't received the questions from my partner there, but I'm going to look at a couple that have come in here on through the app here. So what ancient wisdom texts do you turn to most often?
Ancient wisdom texts. The way I am is I go through stages where so right now I don't have a lot of ancient texts around, but then there's times when I do. I mean, probably the short answer to that is the Bible. I don't think there are other texts, ancient texts that, there are ancient texts I've kind of found at some point in life, but like that's the one that's always around. Yeah, that's a simple answer.
Another question's come in about something a little bit related to what we talked about earlier, but do you have daily contemplative practices? I know one interview you talked about a reading practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I again am good at this sometimes and not as good at other times, but I have learned that some kind of morning practice is, even if I feel like I'm distracted the whole time, I think it still works on me from the inside out all day. So I do a mishmash. I sometimes meditate or just focus on my breath. I pray. I do sometimes, especially when I'm feeling very distracted, I will have kind of, a book that I will think of as contemplative literature. It might be poetry of Mary Oliver. It might be Pema Chodron's When Things Fall Apart. It might be Rilke. It might be a sacred.
You turned me on to Rilke.
Yeah, and I mean Rilke's love poems to God are love. Yeah, the Book of Hours, love poems to God. That translation. So yes, so I do kind of think of that as meditative reading. I said, this morning I walked, and I did kind of my version of walking meditation.
Wonderful. Here's a question. It's a statement at first. It says, religions are widely losing members. Are these people going towards a spirituality instead? If so, is it organized spirituality or the do-it-yourself variety? Not undersure, what are your reflections about religions losing members? And I know you don't really love, I'm spiritual, but not religious kind of, that's just too easy. That's
Yeah,
too easy a term.
let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are in a very unusual time in which the forms that came out of the 20th century, the institutions and religious institutions are but it's all of our institutions. They have to be reformed, remade in some ways, just the structures, right? I mean, even, church is at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. I mean, is that in the Bible? But the entire life of these, and, and the physical plants in the middle of downtowns. I mean, these are just some examples. So I think it's a combination of ways of being institutionally that just do not work in this world as it is emerging and reforming. And then we also are in a really unusual time in which, I mean, across human history, most human beings have been born into some kind of tradition, right? And we suddenly, in this culture and in some other parts of the world, just within a couple of generations have, I don't know, something like 30% or over 30% of people under 30 with absolutely no religious formation.
Right.
So even 20 years ago, when I was just starting to create this project, there was this assumption that what that meant is that religion would die. And that's not the first time that had been foretold. But what I'm experiencing, because we have a lot of young people in our audience who are there's a Pew poll which asks people, are you, what is your religious affiliation? And this is where people started answering none, NONE. And so now that is a cultural category.
Right.
My experience of the nuns, though, so what I'm seeing is that religious formation can fall away, religious identity can fall away, but spiritual inquiry, even I would say theological curiosity, stays very much alive. And of course, these questions of meaning stay alive. And this is the part of the human enterprise where we have addressed that, and where there are conversations across generations and rituals and moral formation that we long for and nuns long for.
Yes.
And so I really believe that they might be, I like to always play this thought experiment of what will somebody 100 years from now look back and see. And I often suspect that what we're focusing on may be invisible, but what will they see? And I really think it's possible that, when I think about in Christianity, the monastic tradition, the monasticism arose as a spiritual renewal movement, absolutely around the edges, right? It was people and the rejection of the organized structure was that it was not living up to its own deepest values.
Right.
And so the critique that's coming from the nuns often in this time is that, and they are, there's a fascinating movement that I'm familiar with of nuns, NUNS, and yes,
Nice.
these beautiful relationships and this kind of cross-generational mentoring and companionship. That's a story, that's a religious story of our time that doesn't get told. But I think it's that kind of ferment and kind of unlikely learning and kind of replanting and curiosity, even about the depths of the traditions, that is shaping us now in ways we can't see.
Thank you. Next person is asking about your integration of religion, spirituality, and politics. And then after a little reflecting on that, how do you think American politics would change if elected leaders had theological training, even if they were not religious?
Oh gosh.
There's
So-
actually been an example in a related tradition to Mormonism. One of the breakoffs, when the people who didn't come west with Brigham Young formed a church, and it was about in the 80s or 90s. And they're based in Independence, Missouri, and it's now called Community of Christ. But all their leadership went to St. Paul's Seminary, and it really structurally, fundamentally changed the church.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious about would politics be similar?
So where I am with politics right now is feeling like I'm interested in how the disarray of our politics is a reflection of deeper human dramas and turmoil and fear and pain. And I feel like there's so much attention paid to that surface of disarray and hostility and fighting. And I have just decided for several years now that I'm just not going to, that's not where my energy is going to go. And I know some people's energy needs to go there. I also am dissatisfied with the narrative. I think, partly social media and news gives an impression that those political hostilities and that stridency defines us, all of us, right? The big us, more than it does in our lives, in our communities. We love people who are completely different from us, and we know how to do that. And that's often people who are in our families, or people who are in our communities. We live with. We all know that love, as it is practiced, is rarely about feeling perfectly understood or perfectly understanding. It's about habits of being. It's sometimes not, it's often, even with our children or our parents, not about how you feel in any given moment. It's what you do. It's what you do. And all of that is lost in our public life. And I just refuse to let that define my sense of who we are. And again, I'm using that "we" as a huge term. And also, most importantly, refuse to let that define what I believe is possible between us. So that's where I'm invested in working and in opening up. What are those possibilities between us, even as we continue to hold very deep, profound, meaningful differences? We have to take that as a given now.
Let's just go with the final question that's come in, and I think this will open up some reflection from you. What causes do you feel most called to support? So if there were a priority of the world's needs that wasn't where you're focusing right now, what would you put as causes that really might be fundamental and most meaningful?
Again, I don't know for sure. I think by that term causes might be meant kind of action or issue areas.
Yeah.
And
Let's go into, even if it's just
Yeah.
projects.
yeah,
ongoing projects.
again, I think that person 100 years from now may only see how we're living with the natural world and what we do with this. If we stop making of the natural world and other, if we get in, we're understanding wholeness, if we honor that and participate in it, both among ourselves and with this world of which we are part. And I think they will see refugees, the movement of people, dislocated people, which is not disconnected from ecology. So if I had causes, those were probably the things I would throw myself at. I don't really, that's kind of not the way I have functioned. Well, I think with my work, I try to draw these things out through a conversation, but I think still my way into that is to try to, first of all, help understand myself, but bring other people along with me in this inquiry of why we behave as we do. Like, what can we, how can we develop inside ourselves a sense of belonging, so that we move differently with these great crises and challenges and find touch points close to home. I think one way people get hopeless, and it's easy to get very discouraging and despairing, about what's happening in the world on all kinds of fronts. And that's partly because we see it way out there, and we have to claim agency where we live. And I think that starts to become more possible when we actually develop some really quiet, but, gifts, capacities that are in us that our culture doesn't draw forth, are a curiosity. Curiosity is an incredible moral muscle. Really wanting to understand, really wanting to know. Listening for me. I also think, I think a great vocation, there are many callings for us as citizens, right? As members of this, of our communities, of our nation, of this planet. So I think there are many callings, and some people are out there being activists, right? Being leaders on those front lines and front lines of care. I also think there are quiet callings, and I would say maybe this is where I associate myself. Like, I think to be a calmer of fear. If any of us can be a calmer of fear, because I see fear is such a powerful force. We're learning this through science, right? And theology's always known it. When a human body is overtaken by fear, it is too much to ask of them to rise to their best selves, or to think something through, or to see another perspective, or to step outside themselves in courage. So, to be a calmer of fear in the midst of our political divides, or our, to let that be overwhelm us with despair about how can we be in a different relationship with the natural world, or learn more about what we can do. That's, I think, a quiet calling. So I'd say that's where I'd say that's the closest thing I have to a cause.
It's been so wonderful, and thank you for sharing so freely. You have lit up from your core, and we here at Sunstone, you're certainly, I think, the largest. Well, I don't want to say you certainly have the largest profile, but yet you speak you speak in that collective we, and you speak from yourself as so enmeshed and integrated that you've modeled far more than what you've said, both tonight and through your work for these past, I guess you started back in 2004. So
Yeah.
last 15,
Yeah.
15 years. And we couldn't be more grateful that you spent some time with us tonight.
Thank you. I love conversation, and I like being on both sides of a conversation, and this was delightful. So thank you so much. And I really, I have so appreciated and respected Sunstone from afar, and I was very happy when this invitation came in.
Yeah, and Kate Moose, when I headed Sunstone, we had a few conversations. I know she was querying me about some stuff so I'm grateful for that long-term interest. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. I know that for everybody who's out there, we're going to have to end the Zoom call, all of us, the three of us that are actually on it right now, and for it to not keep recording. And so we will do that, and we wish you well. And I know that we're looking forward to the Sunstone Symposium these next 3 days. And I hope everyone will join it either virtually, I guess virtually all mornings, and maybe show up in person when you can on the other days with great COVID safety in mind. And with that, we'll close tonight. Thanks so much.